So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at changing the subject of an equation, or of a formula. But before we do that, I just want to draw your attention back to last lesson when we looked at equations and formulas. And I just want to point out that when we were solving this problem here, where we had to find the perimeter of a rectangle, and they gave us the length and width, it was really quite easy to solve this problem because the formula that they gave us was in the form P equals 2 times L plus W. So the P, or the perimeter, was already the subject of the equation. The P was on its own, on the left-hand side, ready to be solved, pretty much. So it was really easy. All we had to do was plug in the values for length and width, and then we had an equation with P on the left-hand side and just a bunch of constants on the right-hand side. So it was really quite simple. We just had to work out what 20 plus 9 multiplied by 2 is, and there were no pronumerals involved with that. There was not really any equation solving involved. So that was really easy, but when they asked us for the length or the width instead of the perimeter, when they gave us the perimeter and asked for one of these pronumerals, it was a little bit more involved because we had to rearrange the equation. So in this case, they gave us the perimeter, they gave us the width, and they asked us to find L. So when we put those values into the equation, we didn't have L as the subject, okay? The subject was P. So L was kind of wrapped up in all these other numbers inside the brackets. So we had to do a bit of equation solving in order to get to our answer. And changing the subject of a formula, what we're doing today, is actually all about this rearranging. So what we did was we put the numbers in first and then solved the equation and then rearranged the equation. But what you can actually do is you can rearrange the equation up here before you have any numbers at all. And that's what we call changing the subject of an equation. So let's have a look at our problems for this lesson. Changing the subject of a formula. So question 1, for the formula V equals U plus AT, so let's just write that down straight away. V equals U plus AT, that's our formula. We need to change the subject to A. So at the moment, the subject is the term that's on the left-hand side on its own. So V is the subject of the equation at the moment. And the question's asking us to make A the subject. Now, A is over here at the moment, so it's got quite a lot going on around it. We want A to be over here on the left-hand side by itself. So the way that we do that is we're pretty much going to treat it like an equation and solve it for A. So we want to get A by itself. We need to get rid of these terms around A. So how are we going to do that? Well, we know our rules for solving equations, so we're just going to apply it to this situation as well. So we don't want U anymore. We want A by itself. So let's get rid of this U because the U is a bit close to A over here. So on the left-hand side now, we're going to have V minus U. And it's all right that this isn't getting any simpler on the left-hand side. We don't actually want to solve the equation. We're not going to have a value for A at the end. So it doesn't matter if the left-hand side gets more and more complicated. All we need to worry about is that A is getting less and less complicated. The right-hand side, we want to get A by itself over here. So if we can start getting rid of terms that are near A, that's good. And we did. So it's a little bit more simple on the right-hand side. We're getting closer to A. Now we just need to get rid of this T term. And remember, AT is the same as A times T. So we're really just applying the same rules that we would apply to get rid of T, or to get rid of a number if this were a regular equation with numbers. So divide both sides by T. These will cancel out. And we're left with V minus U over T, which is quite complicated on the left-hand side, but that's fine because on the right-hand side, we've got A by itself, which is what we want. So at the moment, A is actually the subject of the equation. We've got A all by itself on one side of the equation. And just for convention's sake, we do write the subject on the left-hand side, so we can just flip that around. And we've done it. We've changed the subject of the equation to A. And we did the same thing to both sides the whole time. So the equation didn't change at all. The formula didn't change. It's still the same formula, but we've just got A as the subject now instead. All right, make B the subject of this formula. So question 2, we need to make B the subject, and at the moment, B is quite caught up, isn't it? We've got X as the subject, and B, it's got a square operation on it. It's raised to the power of 2. It's then, we're subtracting 4AC from it, and then we're taking the square root of all of that. So B is really quite buried. There's a lot of terms around B. There's a lot of operations. So we want to get B all by itself, and we don't want any of this stuff around it. So the way we're going to do that is, first of all, we can't really touch this minus 4AC because remember, it's inside the square root. So it's not really minus 4AC. It's the square root of minus 4AC, or it's the square root of B squared minus 4AC. So we can't really touch that yet. First, we need to get rid of this big square root symbol. So we need to use the inverse operation. And once you're really familiar with solving equations and you know all your inverse operations, these sort of questions become really easy. You're basically solving the equation, but you're just not working with constants. You're only working with variables. So we're squaring both sides because the inverse of square root is square. So we square this side and we square this entire side as well. So now on the left, we've got x squared. And squaring the right-hand side just got rid of the big square root. So we're just left with b squared minus 4ac. Okay, so that's a little bit more simple on the right-hand side, but we still got a lot going on with the b, and we want b by itself. So we're going to get rid of this minus 4ac now. And we can do that because it's not in a square root anymore. The inverse operation of subtraction is addition. So if we add 4ac to both sides, that will get rid of this negative 4ac. So on the left-hand side, now we've got x squared plus 4ac. We can't do it, so we just need to write it as an algebraic expression, and that's fine. It's just looking more and more complicated on the left-hand side now because we're changing it, we're rearranging it so that we've got the bulk of all the terms on the left, and we're just left with b on the right. So we're getting closer to making b the subject now. There's one step that's left, and that is getting rid of this power here. So at the moment, b is squared. So we need to do the inverse operation to get rid of that power. So squaring, the opposite of squaring or the inverse of squaring is square rooting. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. But remember, when we take the square root, there's actually two answers. There's positive square root and negative square root. So we need to remember to put that plus or minus sign. And that's pretty much it. So on the left-hand side, we've got plus or minus the square root of x squared plus 4ac. And on the right-hand side, we took the square root of a square, so we're just left with b. And for convention's sake, we just flip those around because we like to have the subject of the equation on the left-hand side. And there we go. So that's the equation with b as the subject.